we really don't know, I guess, what the Earth looks like. We only have the pictures that they said that they took during the moon landing. Well, Mark Sargent on the program tonight, he also has a lot to say about the flat Earth, and he has a lot of theories behind it, so we thought we'd bring him on the program. We'll tell you more about the geoidal aspects of this. I was discussing it with him. Mark Sargent, you're on Ground Zero. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Clyde. Thank you for inviting me.
So, believe it or not, Mark, even though that everybody thinks that, being a flat earther makes you a moron or makes you crazy, there's actually a number of people who have written me and said, hey, Clyde, you should talk about this because there's a lot of new ground being covered by the newer flat earth theorists that takes into consideration the new mapping of the planet, geoidal kind of phenomenon going with it, the idea that it's not necessarily round or oblate, it's kind of shaped like a misshapen potato. I mean, kind of strange things coming out of science, theories that I'm thinking, wait a minute, did we already establish with Copernicus that the Earth is round? Why is it that you think that there's this upswing, and why do you think, when did you start thinking that the world was flat?
Yeah, it's weird you even mentioned that, because a year ago, if you would have asked me, I would have told you that, to leave the room. It was insane. It was crazy. There's no way it could be. But about 9 months ago, I started looking on, on the internet, and there is sort of a kind of a little new movement, sort of a new revolution of people that are coming forward and are questioning it for various reasons. And so I was kind of digging into it, and I wasn't sold on it because, for most people in the conspiracy world, and you'd know this, the flat earth theory or the enclosed world theory is not only the runt of the litter, it is the last one you would ever look at because it's ridiculous. And I certainly wasn't going to look at it. But I was looking at some of the guys' videos that was out there. Eric DeBay had some good stuff. The NASA channel had some interesting stuff. And I set out to debunk it, honestly. Before your callers come in and say you're absolute loon, look, I set out to stomp this thing out of the ground. Yeah. And as I was doing it, more and more stuff started really coming to light. And I was going through the timeline and, looking into Antarctica and exploring things and really, taking a hard look at NASA and pictures of the Earth or absence thereof. And then about 6 or 7 weeks ago, I just had this moment of clarity where I just woke up in the middle of the night and said, you know what? There's something to this. The message that's out there now is kind of like a staticky radio station. And so I decided to give it some clarity and structure. And I made a series of videos over really a very, very quick amount of time. I mean, most of the videos that are out there, the Flat Earth Clues, I did in 8-9 days. Tops, to do them all.
Is the new flat Earth philosophy kind of like the idea that, there have been a number of people now that have come forward and they're talking about the holographic universe, talking about how, this is all a construct, that we live in a false reality, that, everything we've been taught is wrong, and therefore, all the things we heard about the Earth being flat, firmament above and below, that's all applying now because, quite frankly, this is the Truman Show. What do you say?
Yeah. Are we talking about, not to get into predictive programming too much, but are we talking about a giant under the dome Truman Show, Simpsons movie dome? Take any other of the movies, the one that came out just recently, The Signal. Are we talking about a giant dome-like structure which more or less simulates a globe? And again, it sounds ridiculous, and but the more I looked into it, the more I started, there was a tipping point where I started looking at the globe and saying, okay, when exactly did this become a globe? And why does everybody believe without a shadow of doubt, without an inkling of doubt in their soul that it's a globe? And
well, it's normalcy bias is what it is. It's normal. I mean, look, our normalcy bias tells us, because for like 500 years, give or take a couple, maybe more, we've been told from, Pythagoras, you got all these people, Copernicus, you got Kepler, you got all of these people who have been pushing the issue of a round Earth, trying to, even Martin Luther and Calvin said that it was blasphemy to say that the Earth was round. And for some reason, the round Earth thing took off and held together, even before we had astronauts going up and allegedly taking pictures of the Earth some 250,000 miles out.
Long before that. And therein lies the problem. If you say that it's a globe in 1514, or whenever you decide that people really latched onto it, you've got a real problem there because the technology isn't even remotely close to discover it. And I don't want to hear people saying, oh yeah, Magellan, circle the earth, because, we were burning witches back then, right? So when, the first balloons to carry people weren't until 1760. The first airplanes weren't until 1900. That's 400 years later. And then to even get above the atmosphere, you weren't talking the first space shots. The Russians and the Americans, their first early rocket programs weren't until 1957. So the question then becomes, let's say you go up in 1957, or whenever you decide to take the picture, and it doesn't look exactly like the globe that's been sitting in your classroom for 20 generations.
Have you ever heard the Apollo, the Apollo 8 transmissions? And this is what was really weird. The Apollo 8 transmissions, if you remember, they were talking to the astronauts, and Mission Control said, can you get a shot of the Earth for us? And they said, okay, we'll give it a shot. So they went and they pointed it at the window to try and get a shot of the Earth. And one of the guys at Mission Control said, what am I looking at? And he says, that's the Earth. And he says, why is it I'm getting this blob kind of weird thing? He says, it doesn't look like anything I've seen in school. He says, well, let me see if I can get a telephoto lens. Anybody got a telephoto lens? And they're all like scrambling to find a telephoto lens to get a shot of the Earth. But what they got was just like this light, flat blob on the camera, and Mission Control's all pissed off saying, well, we spent all this money and this is what we get. We get a picture like this. And ever since then, I always thought to myself, well, what if that's what they were shooting at? They just saw this expansive blue blob that's out there, and you see that with the shuttle missions. You see that at the ISS. You see that everywhere. Where you just see that area. It's just this blue expansion, this huge blue expansion, and you see kind of a curvature, but it's really not. It's really not that definitive. And I was always thinking I always remember that Apollo 8 broadcast where they were just basically saying, I don't know what you're shooting at, but it doesn't look like anything I've seen in school. And that was one of the things that I think was important to bring up to you to see if you even remember that broadcast.
I don't remember that broadcast, but it leads me into one of the points that I really hammered on early on, which I try to tell people. I go, okay, find me on the internet right now. It's an open book test. Find me 2 NASA sanctioned pictures of the Earth. And I say 2 because there's only one that ever sticks out, and it's the one showing most of Africa on a very, very cloudy Earth and what they're passing off as Antarctica. And that is the only picture that was on the internet and it's going to be lost on some people out there, because if you do a search, for the Earth from space now, if you do a Google search, you're going to see a whole bunch of composites. But 15 years ago, this was right in front of me.
I know.
And I missed it.
I brought that up about Io too, or Io, the moon. They got composites now of everything. It's not necessarily a shot like the Earth or any other moon. It's just composites, and so that picture they took from the moon is very valuable because that's the standard, because that's all they got. Mark Sargent with us tonight on Ground Zero talking about the flat Earth. Well, I guess you could call this Flat Earth 101. Mark Sargent, my guest tonight, who is an expert on the flat Earth thought, the theories, the ideas, the facts, in his opinion, as to what we need to be looking at and understanding about something as crazy as believing the Earth is flat. Mark Sargent back with us. So, Mark, you're saying that you're just recently converting over to this idea. What was it? Okay, what was the first thing that caught you and you go, whoa, I got to check into this? What was the thing that grabbed you by the nape of the neck and said, Mark, you got to look at this. The Earth is flat?
The first thing that caught my eye was the map itself, which was, if you're using a map, and I was looking at the flat Earth map, which is, if you look at the wiki map projections, it's called the azimuthal, AZIMUTHL, equidistant map. That map seemed very unusual to me because what happens is, it's a top-down view from the North Pole, and all the continents are grouped to the center, and all the southern hemisphere oceans are stretched on the outside. But Antarctica on that map, excuse me, stretches around the entire outside like a giant ring of ice. And I thought, well, that should be easy enough to debunk because, Antarctica, as we all know, is a circular continent, a little bigger around than Australia. So that should be easy enough to prove. And so when I started doing research into the Antarctic expeditions, I ran into a guy who was more known for the hollow Earth theory. His name was Richard Byrd. And, excuse me, he was an admiral for the United States Navy. Youngest admiral of all time, age of 41. But after 1926, he didn't spend any more time at the North Pole. He spent it down in Antarctica, and really spent from 1928 till his dying day in 1957 doing multiple expeditions down in Antarctica. And I thought that was kind of interesting because, well, I hadn't really known this. It's like, well, I knew about the hollow earth theory, but I didn't know about Antarctica. So I was looking through his mission logs and stuff that was happening down there. And he comes back, after I think his fourth mission, because he had done 5 or 6. I think after his fourth, though, he comes back and does a tour of the United States. Because what he'd do is he'd do expeditions and come back and tour the States and do press conferences. And he did this CBS television show in 1954, and you can find it on YouTube. It's real easy to find. Just look up Richard E. Byrd. And the television show, he really talked about Antarctica being the greatest continent, out there as far as resources and scientific exploration. And he just couldn't talk about it enough. In fact, from a resource standpoint, he was saying that, there was a mountain range made entirely of coal, and there was oil, and there was minerals, and the uranium, and all these nations were down there, including, Russia and England, Argentina, New Zealand, Australia. Everybody was down there. And then he goes down, he talks about he's going to go on for one more mission in 1955, which was called Operation Deep Freeze. Excuse me. So, hang on one second. So he goes down in 1955 for Operation Deep Freeze. And whatever happens down there, everything changes, because at the end of that, everything started to get really, really weird. And so the space program started to fire up, and I won't get into that right away, but they sealed off Antarctica, kicked everybody out, and they created the Antarctic Treaty in 1959, and they sealed off Antarctica forever. And by that, I mean no corporation to this day, even now, doesn't matter how powerful you are, petroleum industry, mining industry, gas industry, you don't get to go down there. Nobody gets to go down to Antarctica and do any resources, even though it's supposedly resource rich and very, very huge. And I thought that was very, very interesting, because if you wanted to hide something like a flat earth model, that's exactly what you would do. The first thing you would have to do is seal off the outer edge. And so for me, the Antarctic being this, transformed from this, this smallish continent into this giant ring of ice became very, very real. And then I started looking at other things, but that was absolutely the first thing that caught my eye.
So the very idea that, you have all these rich resources and no country has laid claim to Antarctica. I mean, we don't.
Yeah, nobody owns Antarctica as of right now, and nobody's going to. In fact, the treaty isn't even up for negotiations until the year 2041. And
there's no government. There's no government in Antarctica. Nothing. It's just
there's some military bases down there, some scientific explorations, on the fringes. But as far as the core of it, and we're talking millions and millions of square miles, nobody gets to do anything. And, and as, of course they say, well, now it's because of environmentalism. And I go, fine, environmentalism, that's great. But in 1959, that didn't exist. I mean, Greenpeace wasn't even founded until 1971. And that was just a few guys in a tie-dye shirt and in a raft. So don't tell me you're sealing it off in 1959 for environmental reasons. Whatever the reason was, it was to hide something. And for me, that was the first step of the journey, which was, okay, how big is this thing? What are we talking about here? Because, that it was what I was expecting them to do. It was what I would do.
Well, and if you take a look at the flat maps, as you say, you see Antarctica covers that whole stretch underneath all those continents, and it's almost as if it's like a barrier, and that the barrier gets taller and taller to keep us from wanting to get off the planet if the barrier edge was there.
Antarctica is 2 miles high. It slopes up very, very steeply, and it's unique as far as all the continents is concerned, because it becomes a 2 mile high minimum plateau that extends the entire continent. No other continent is like this.
It's amazing. Mark Sargent with us tonight on Ground Zero, talking about flat Earth. He's an expert, recently converted to believing that the Earth is flat. And so you were saying that the maps and the Antarctic ice pack, or at least the ice wall, convinced you that this is the horizon that's being blocked off, that we're not getting any more knowledge about it. Were there other things? I mean, I remember someone was they were actually remarking to me on Facebook that the way any pilot or any commercial aircraft plots its courses through the southern hemisphere is kind of suspect as well.
Yeah. The GPS system in the southern hemisphere caught my eye, mostly because there was a YouTube guy sometime last year posted a thing on how you couldn't get any nonstop flights in the Southern Hemisphere. And I thought that was really interesting. So I started doing some research on it. And yeah, it was very, very tough to do. 95% of the flights in the Southern Hemisphere, and by that I mean most of the stuff in Australia to most of the stuff in South America, are connections. And that was really, really odd. So I started doing some more research on it. And it's like, okay, why are there such few nonstops? But when you look at the azimuthal equidistant map, which, by the way, I'm going to go on a side tangent here, is also the map. If you look in the wiki list of map projections, it's also used by the USGS, which is the United States Geological Survey. And it is also the map that is used on the United Nations flag. Which is also the same map that the flat earth people use on their official map, although two of those maps are completely legit, but the flat earth map is absolutely insane. So, but if you use that map, the flights can't, if you're using a flat earth map, flights, which you would normally see on the Southern Hemisphere, become very, very stretched because it becomes the outer border. And so, distances become skewed. And so it's going, okay, that's really strange. And so how would they hide that? And they would hide that mostly with connections. For example, if you're going from Sydney, Australia to Buenos Aires, that's 7,400 miles straight across the South Pacific Ocean. If you're using a globe, that's a piece of cake. But if you're using a literal flat azimuthal map, it's a weird angle you have to take that crosses the United States. And what was weird was when I was looking at it, one of the connections that you use if you're going to go from Sydney to Buenos Aires cuts through San Francisco or Los Angeles. And on a globe, it makes no sense at all. It's absolutely ridiculous. But on a flat map, it's almost literally a straight shot. And that happens time and time again with these connections, like, connections going from New Zealand, going up to Dubai and then down to Buenos Aires or again, anywhere in the southern part of South America. It doesn't make sense on a globe, but it does on a flat map. And it's really, really strange.
I had a rude awakening.
That caught my eye as well.
The other night, I got a rude awakening about antipodals. We were talking about CERN and if it was or maybe Fukushima, if it was to melt down, where it would end up. And see, I was thinking to myself that if it's like, for example, you look at Switzerland, you look at CERN, you look at France, you look at all these areas where CERN is. And I was saying if it was to melt through, it's in a central area there. It would probably melt through to another area that would be north central. But according to antipodal maps, you have to take into consideration that the map is skewed to where the south meets north and the north meets south. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing everything that you thought was right side up, upside down, and vice versa. So you don't know how the planet is literally positioned. We've just been taught that everything is like the United States, Canada, Canada, the United States, South America, Russia, Europe, India, Italy, and then further into Africa and then down. That's how we see the map, but that's not how the maps are now. That's not how the Earth is really. That's what I'm figuring out with these antipodal ideas.
Yeah. And by the way, that one of those clips you played before you had me on, where it was the West Wing, where they were talking about the Mercator map versus the Gall-Peters map. I like to use that. In fact, I'm going to try to use that in my next clue, and that is, look, they won't even show you exactly the proportions, the accurate proportion differences between the continents. The map that you see on your blackboard, that shows, the wonderful, United States and how Greenland is really, really big and Africa it seems just as big. Every scientist knows that's not the case, but they have a hard time even trying to introduce the correct proportion maps into schools because there's a comfort zone issue and they don't want to freak people out. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I was looking at that scene again because I remember that scene, and I remember I was just as baffled as Allison Janney was. She was appearing to be in the segment, staring at it. I was like, going, now wait a minute, is this real? And I looked up, and it's real. They said that the maps that we see today are disproportionate to the land masses that really exist. Like Greenland and Africa are basically the same size.
But they're not. Africa's 17 times bigger.
Yeah. Right. And that Mexico or I can't remember, was some continent or something, they make it smaller when in reality it's much bigger.
Oh, yeah. South America's monstrous. Africa is monstrous. And that line that she said at the end, where she, she goes, what the hell is that? And he goes, it's where you've been living this whole time. Yeah. And we don't know. And again, they won't even show you that. And so when people say, well, why would the authority hide, the real shape of the earth from us? Are you kidding? They won't even show you a slight difference.
Well, and it's also a part of programming. I mean, if a continent, if the North American continent is superior as it looks on the map, we're above Mexico and Canada's above us. And also, and that's the thing, is that it's the pecking order. You've got the maps the way they are. They show the richer, more affluent, continents as bigger, and the ones that aren't so, approved are the ones that are being, demonetized, or being smaller or shortened or somehow shrunk down. And so the land masses don't match the true land masses as far as scale on a regular map or on a regular globe.
Absolutely. And on an azimuthal map, there is no north, south, east, or west. No one's even, everybody's just grouped up in the center and, with oceans on the outside. And, there is no top or bottom model. Interesting.
I'm going to go to Chris now because he's kind of, actually, Chris has been thinking along the same lines you are about the positions of the continents. Chris, you were talking about just what he kind of touched upon, what Mark touched upon, and that is the UN flag. Tell us more about that, Chris.
Well, I just like your guest has been saying, I've been delving down this rabbit hole as well online and all the YouTube videos, and that was one thing that really stood out to me was that the UN flag had the flat Earth map on it, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And another thing that in relation to that map was, remember the movie Dark City?
Yes,
excellent movie.
It's actually a movie about the flat Earth theory. In that movie, you remember that Dark Council standing around. They had a round table they were standing around. They had these black blocks in the center of the circle, and that those black blocks, if you correlate it to the flat Earth map, line up perfectly.
Yeah.
So, Chris, this is one. Mark, tell me about. Chris was kind of touching on this flat Earth map on the UN. Is this true? Is this the? I mean, I've seen the map of the UN. I've seen the flag of the UN, and yes, the continents look a little bit mushed and squished. Is that truly a flat Earth version of?
It is absolutely a flat Earth version. In fact, I covered it in Clue 3, which was called the Map Makers. And if you lay the flat Earth map or the azimuthal equidistant map right on top of the United Nations flag, it is identical, with the exception of one thing, which is on the UN flag, there is no Antarctica. For some strange reason, they left out the entire continent of Antarctica. And that flag was, the final version of it was done in 1946. Happened to be coincidentally about the same time as Operation High Jump, but we won't go into that. So instead of Antarctica on the outside, they have a pair of giant spiky wreaths that almost surround the entire thing. But they never talk about it in any, you can go ahead and look it up on the internet. The UN flag never talks about the absence of Antarctica on that map, and I find that just fascinating.
It's always intriguing. Of course, we had a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding Antarctica. The Nazis were fascinated with Antarctica, possibly even new Schwabenland bases out there that they have hidden the saucers there, if anything else. And so there's so many things that lead to this type of speculation. Mark, how do you feel about the northern end with the hollow Earth idea, or the idea that there's some way to dig in and go below the surface?
In the model that I kind of follow, which is really based on Orlando Ferguson's 1830 flat and stationary Earth model, it's not perfectly flat. And I know flat earthers out there are going to cringe and say, blasphemy, it's as flat as a coin. And it's like, well, okay, fine. I don't care. The model I'm using is, it's more shaped like a roulette table you have that kind of bulge in the center which helps with sunrise and sunsets. Now, if there is a bulge in the center and it is very, and that bulge is deep enough, oh, absolutely. You could go into the hollow Earth theory, which, is based on Admiral Byrd's 1926 mission in a pretty rickety plane, where he went in there. Oh, yeah, there'd be more than enough room for a hollow Earth theory. Hollow Earth theory, in my model, does not clash with flat Earth at all.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you for the call, and thank you for adding to the conversation tonight.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Yeah, it's interesting. So you have a lot of people like Chris, for example, who's noticed that the flat Earth model is on the UN flag. Is that an indication? Are they hinting something with that?
I think they jumped the gun, as a matter of fact. I have no doubt. I have absolutely no doubt that ancient societies and ancient groups, and I don't necessarily want to call out too many of them by name, but there are higher, big orders of people that knew about this. But if you didn't have the technology to do anything about it, then it just kind of blended into myth and legend. So let's say you were the king of Spain in the 1500s. You had an old map that showed you, the circular map. What could you do about it? You still had wooden-hulled ships and cold weather gear was limited. There was nothing you could do. So I think starting in about 1928, they figured, okay, we've got the technology to figure out what the world, if it's actually true. And I think they were looking for it and sent Byrd, and he was their point guy. And they sent him for 30 years trying to look for this thing. And I think at one point, the early 1950s, 1953, 1954, I think they gave up at one point. It's like, you know what? He hasn't found it in 30 years. Let's just call it quits and make a whole bunch of money.
Fantastic.
And then, of course, that's Murphy's Law, because the very next year everything changed and everything just went completely sideways and the government started doing strange stuff.
Mark Sargent, my guest tonight on Ground Zero, making some good arguments about flat Earth. Recently converted to that philosophy and idea. Many people now are taking a second look at flat Earth theories and trying to piece together just what is going on and why scientists and many other people don't agree about how the Earth is shaped and whether or not it's flat, round, or a plate or whatever. Just some strange theories coming out about the Earth lately. We thought we had it all down for 500 years, but apparently not.
Yeah, hi. I have a question. I learned a long time ago that the Earth was actually an oblate ellipsoid type shape, which means flattened at the poles, and elliptical or an ellipsoid. But anyway, so I have a question. When I think of flat, I think of edges. So where are these edges, Mark?
Got it. Hey, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Where are the edges, she says?
The edges in this case, there's going to be two types of edges. One is going to be the Antarctica, the entire continent. So if you look at it as a azimuthal map, from the top down, the first edge is literally going to be, and I know it's tough to visualize without seeing the map, but imagine the entire continent of Antarctica is literally stretched around the outside of a dinner plate. That would be the outer edge. And then the upper edge would be, in this case, a Truman Show type, dome. And there's been a lot of dispute as far as how far up it is. Is it 400 miles? Is it 2,000 miles? But that would be the upper and the outer edge.
Well, when they do measurements of the different shields, like the electromagnetic shield, et cetera, shouldn't there be, and the atmosphere, shouldn't there be changes in as far as the distances? And I know there are, but there should be consistent changes. Shouldn't there be with the flat Earth theory?
Well, are we talking about the arc of the enclosure itself?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's what they were doing. And I know we hadn't covered it here yet, but in 1957, when the rocket program started up, in 1958 they put nukes on the top of them, and they started firing nukes straight up, both the United States and Russia, for 4 years, and put some heavy stuff up there. And I think in that case they were defining the shape. They were painting the sky, with hundreds of kilotons and sometimes going into the megatons. And I think they mapped it out. Now, do we know what exactly they mapped out? No, but I have no doubt that it's some sort of uniform shape. And if you want to call it the firmament, you can. I don't want to necessarily lean too much on one religion, but yeah, I absolutely do think there's a shape.
It's different than what maybe people think. But yeah. Well, the other thing is, so how do we have, the bulbs that you spoke of could kind of explain the 24-hour day that we have?
Yeah. In an enclosed system like this, the sun and the moon, and it's not just my model, it's most of the flat Earth models that are out there. The sun and the moon are actually, suspended. They are above the circle and they're moving independently. The sun is not 92 million miles away, and the moon is not 237,000 miles away. They are way, closer. and they circle the top part.
There you go, Joan. We're out of time, but I appreciate you calling in tonight. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
You bet. Bye-bye. Mark Sargent with us tonight on Ground Zero. Just recently converted over to the idea that the Earth is flat, and he's got a lot of things he wants to tell you about why he feels this way. If you have any questions, you can give us a call. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. More from Mark Sargent, more of your calls coming up on Ground Zero. Don't go away. Most scientists love to explain something simple with a needlessly complicated theory. And in this case, well, we have unwittingly fallen into a possible position to open the door for a resurrection of what can be called the age-old conspiracy of flat Earth thought or flat Earth theory. There have always been and likely will continue to be people who steadfastly maintain that the Earth is flat. This is clearly an eccentric position, and yet the most common representations of the Earth are flat maps. We hear in the Bible the four corners of the earth or the ends of the earth. Thousands of years of effort have been put into the representations of the earth as a globe, and many of the techniques used are highly sophisticated and still quite valuable today. So far, we have made the simplifying assumption that the earth is a perfect sphere. Looking at many bumps and hills, we see that this is clearly not the case if you're looking at the geoid earth. The geoid earth is something that I discovered as I was doing my investigations into the Alps and the surrounding areas of CERN. I noticed the geoid map was part of the mapping of irregular structures, ups, downs, canyons, mountains, places in the ocean that definitely go below sea level. And as we look at the geoid irregular structure of the Earth looks more or less like a potato or a big ball of dough that needs to be spun around quickly to look more like pizza. So I guess you could say some questions you could ask about this whole thing and working with the resulting models. You can get very complex. You can be very simple. Most applications, though, is we're looking at an ellipsoidal model of the Earth. That's sufficient, I guess. A best fit ellipsoid for the Earth is about 0.3% shorter than it is wide and differs from the geoid vertical, which is about 100 meters at worst. But despite its lumps, the geoid is a bunch of ellipsoidal flat circles. So the question we ask, is the Earth flat? Is the Earth flat? Yes. In some places, it's flat. Is it round? Yes. At its best, right at the equator. Is spinning and distance part of the illusion that the Earth is a perfect sphere? I guess if you use the pizza dough analogy I used in the first hour. So if you wonder about my opinion of the flat Earth, I can tell you that, I can look at what Charles Fort once said, and that is, he said, quote, if there's an underlying oneness of all things, it doesn't matter where we begin, whether with stars or laws or supply and demand or frogs or Napoleon Bonaparte. One measures a circle beginning anywhere. So I guess it's better to ponder some pure form, circular logic and talk with my guest tonight, Mark Sargent, who actually is an expert on the flat Earth. I was discussing with my staff. We had Crow 777 on the show a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about what is known as the moon wave. And just curious as to what you think of his this guy. Once again, he also kind of pushes the issue that the Earth is nothing more than some sort of a staging area where we're in some sort of a holographic universe. What do you say to that?
Yeah. It's funny you mention that because Crow 777 is one of the guys that I reference, and I know the flat Earth community just hates me for referencing it because he's not officially a flat Earth guy. But what I was trying to get the point was, like, look, if you want to see some really interesting images of the moon to give you a second take of where we're actually living, look at that guy's videos. Yeah, the lunar wave stuff that he has is brilliant. And so, for me, I had to use him because it's the best footage out there I've ever seen of the moon. And it folds into my model very, very well. And that is, look, the moon is not what you think it is. And, if it is 237,000 miles away, I really, really doubt it. But yeah, it's a fantastic, great stuff that he does. I love his footage, and I recommend him, and I subscribe to his channel. And bring him up whenever I can. So it was a wonderful coincidence that I get to follow him.
Oh, fantastic. Let's go to Daniel in Texas. Daniel, you're on with Mark Sargent. Go ahead.
Oh, wow.
Go ahead.
Hold on one second.
You're on the air, buddy. Hold on one second.
Hey,
you're supposed to be ready when we get to your telephone call. Let's go. You there? Okay, you're not there. We're going to have to go to someone else. Let's go now to John in Texas, KTRH, John Ground Zero.
Hey, guys. Really interesting show tonight. I got a question. How come we have pictures from outer space from astronauts of the Earth? It looks so spherical. And then second to that, if we have pictures from outer space of the Earth and it looks like a sphere, would the easiest way to tell if it were flat, for me, in my mind, and I haven't done any research on this, I will, but I haven't so far. Right now, it's just kind of intriguing. What I would do is fly a plane from wherever I'm sitting exactly west and try to end up right where I was when I came back around. And then, right after that, fly a plane exactly north and try to end up exactly where I am sitting right now. And then judge those two distances and see if those are exact or not. Would that prove or disprove anything? Or would that just be a waste of time?
Do you want me to grab this?
Yeah, go right ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, from that standpoint, that's actually not a bad idea. However, and you know, please, I'm not going to do it justice, but you know, please watch the Flat Earth Clues thing on YouTube or just Google Flat Earth Clues, because the GPS, in order to do those two things, fly east to west and north to south, you're going to have to use the GPS system. And in my opinion, the GPS system, no different than NASA, was created primarily to keep us from seeing what the Earth really looks like. So in short, the GPS system couldn't be trusted for those sort of plane flights, especially once you get to the southern hemisphere, because your plane's going to drop off the radar anyway.
Right. So then we would have to do it with a old school a nautical compass. No,
you don't even have to do that. I've got a better way. If you don't mind me saying it on air, there's a great way, because to prove this out one way or another, whether it's flat. And I don't know if I'm going to be the one to do it, but what you do is you take two ships, two cold weather ships. You put them in, on a flat map, put them side by side next to each other in some sort of 6 o'clock position, if the face is a clock. And then one goes clockwise, the other goes counterclockwise. If Antarctica is only as big as they say it is, then it should take about the same, time around that, you would have to go around Australia, not accounting for icebergs. But if that map is literal, then you could go a week, you could go 2 weeks, you could go 3 weeks, and those ships would not meet. And for me, because on an azimuthal map, the Antarctica can't, if it's a globe, then that Antarctica's coastline cannot be that big. And that's how I would solve it. So just so you know.
Okay.
Thank you, John, for the call. I appreciate it. Thank you. Let's go to Robert in California. Let's see on K News. You're on Ground Zero.
Hello. First, I thought this was an April Fool's joke.
Okay.
That's the first thing I thought, and then the person who answered your phone said, no, it's not an April Fool's joke. And then the second thing I thought of is the person who's talking, is he from Lancaster, California? Because that's where the Flat Earth Society is based out of, is Lancaster. And then the next thing I have to ask is do you ever look at the heavens and at night and see the moon and the stars and all the different planets, and they're all round, and
Robert, you realize that the moon is a unique thing. It's a unique round sphere. It's pretty unique in the big scheme. I mean, not everything. I mean, the only reason why we see round planets is because, and this is the truth, and I'm not a flat earther by any stretch, NASA has artistically rendered them so.
So when I look at the sun, you mean to tell me the sun, when I see the sun with my own plain eyes,
round.
I look at the moon with my own plain eyes?
The sun is round, but some of the planets that we see up there, that have been up there, they've been rendered round. Some of them aren't perfectly round. In fact, Mars isn't even red. You see, Mars is yellow. It's a yellow planet. Robert, will you let me speak, please? Please let me. You're not funny. You're interrupting me, and I'm trying to speak here. Have you ever seen Mars in a telescope? It's not red. It's yellow, because NASA artistically renders it red. It's it looks yellow, and it doesn't even look half spherical. When you're looking at it through a telescope, you kind of have to use your imagination because you're looking through a round lens.
Oh man, it's just funny.
Robert, have you seen Mars through a telescope? Yes or no?
I have. Yes, I have.
So then you know that it's a yellow planet, not a red planet.
Yes.
Okay,
I
so
mean, you can look.
It's a yellow planet, and then when you look at it, it seems to have some strange tapers that don't necessarily make it look round. It looks kind of weird. It doesn't look anything like what you see in the textbooks. It's weird.
Yeah, and then, I mean, they've flown the SR-71 through the whole... so when they fly the SR-71 and the planet's not just... Holy crud.
When they've flown the SR-71, what are you saying, Robert? I'm trying to figure out here, bud.
The SR-71 is flown from one spot to another throughout the... oh my God! And you're perpetuating this on the radio.
I'm not perpetuating anything. Robert's perpetuating it. I'm just trying to figure out where you're coming from. Your normalcy bias is getting crushed, and I'm just watching it break down, and I feel bad.
Can I throw something at Robert
quickly? Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Rob, real quick.
Look at the sun.
So somehow the Earth is different from all the other planets. Somehow it's flat.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that everything up in the sky may not be what you think it is, man.
Okay. All right.
Hey, Robert, have you ever seen the planet as a geoidal sphere? Or I don't even know if you can call it a sphere. Have you heard of the geoid mapping of the planet? Have you seen that? That doesn't make us look anywhere near as round as you think it is. It looks like a chewed up wad of bubble gum. What's that?
I understand that the Earth is shaped like an egg. I understand. No,
I'm not talking about Oblate. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the Earth shaped like a wad of chewing gum.
Okay.
Yeah, have you seen that?
A wad of chewing gum is flat.
Well, it's got some flat places.
So you mean to tell me that if all of a sudden a ship went to the edge of the Earth, somehow it'd have to do a 90-degree turn in order to be able to keep on going? Is that what you're saying? I don't know. Maybe be a 3-stop U-turn. Who knows? I don't know. Yeah, that's your area. Come on, I don't know. Robert? I'm confused now. I'm completely confused.
Robert, let me ask you one question.
No. You know what? We're out of time. So I know we've basically... I'm gonna go pound my head against the wall. I'll be back. Robert, thank you for calling. We'll be back.
FM News 101 KXL.
Okay, Mark, I want to ask you a question.
Yep.
How do we explain eclipses? I mean, the eclipse, we see the shadow of the Earth covering the moon. How do we beat that with flat Earth? Because we got the eclipse coming up. Saturday morning.
Good point. When it comes to those two big objects, the sun and the moon. In fact, I'll even throw a Crow 777 reference in there. I think it's simulated. I do not trust with the moon. What is happening on the moon, I don't trust. So if, for example, there are lunar waves, and if the moon is some sort of, regardless whether it's a 2D thing or a 3D model that's being projected upon, that's simulated. It's easy enough to do from a programming standpoint. Doing a blood moon or the eclipse on the other side, then you just swing one object in front of the other, or you could do it directly on the sun itself. There's multiple ways you could do it.
Wow. Okay, let's go to Jack in New Jersey. Mark Sargent, go ahead.
Hey, how you doing tonight? Great topic. I watched all the clips, very informative. Never really subscribed to this or like most people say, oh, that's crazy. But he's very compelling in the way he presents all this information. That said, the idea that we are possibly now on a flat Earth and with it finite boundaries, almost like a container or like a hamster cage, it kind of makes more sense now why world governments and others have put certain control measures in place just in the past 100 years in terms of worrying about the population, climate, the global climate change, possibly food resources, and even making underground bases for whatever reason to preserve it all. So I'm wondering if Mark has any views on that. And, the idea for the longest time that we were going to go somewhere else, go to space and go beyond. Now, this makes more sense, including,
Go ahead, Mark, and answer his question. Go ahead.
Yeah. From a government standpoint, you got to remember that, when this, in my opinion, this was not going to be a secret that could have been kept forever. I think it was, if let's say this was a giant Truman Show under the dome type scenario, I don't think it could have been kept forever. But the governments in power decided well, that's 60 years ago now, that they didn't want to see any sort of big shift in how things were worked. And I'm not going to address the climate stuff that he was talking about because it's way too recent. But I will say this, because the big question comes up, it's like, why would they hide it? I get that all the time. It's like, why would the governments, why would the authority, why would the world governments hide it, the ones that knew? And for me, it came down to a fundamental shift in how people view, well, let's just say it, the builder, the creator, who built it? Because I get that all the time. Who built it? Who created it? And from a religious standpoint, the major 5 religions and, all the minor ones, they would all of a sudden, all of them would have their own version of the Ark of the Covenant, physically in front of them. I don't want to get too metaphysical by saying, there's a barrier with a handprint of God on it. But if there was proof of a structure, that is proof of some sort of intelligent design. And the governments, the authority, you're very rich, your royalty, they wouldn't want to backpedal and try to recover from that. It's a tough thing to do. So yeah, putting strict controls in place ever since then, absolutely. Anything you could think of, population control, climate, control, anything they can to keep you distracted, to keep you from looking for the fence. Does that sort of help?
Answer your question?
Yeah, very much so. And if I just could add one more thing to that, most people, I know for myself, don't go beyond going to Disney World or Hawaii for a vacation, and they've never gone up higher than in a plane. So it's not like they're going to explore outer space, let alone what's beyond Chile, what's down in the Antarctic. So it's kind of like a perfect container, the way he's describing it.
Well, it's also a perfect cover if you want to believe it. I mean, it's a great cover because no one really knows what goes on in Antarctica. We have our speculations. There are a few bases down there. The Germans had interest in it. Admiral Byrd had interest in it, but the interest is gone, and no one has claimed it. So that makes you wonder about just what its purpose is besides just being a big ice shelf to block us from whatever. Who knows? I mean, to hear Mark, it's like it's a big shelf to block us from falling off the other side of the planet, I guess.
Yeah. And a lot of it, by the way, falls on the shoulders of NASA. I really haven't dug into them too much, but they would be the organization to be in charge of really the cover up because they control the skies. And that's it again. That was when I was trying to debunk it. That was one of the things that stuck out. It's like, okay, you're going to have to control the skies somehow. And then right after, the third big nuclear test,